Hi, welcome to Bridge to Wellness. My name is Bridget Guila, your host. And today with me is Dr. Sophie. Dr. Sophie, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's
Thank you.
Such a pleasure to be here with
I'm
you.
so excited to have you on the show. You specialize in naturopathic medicine.
Yes.
But first of all, I'm so fascinated with your background and how you grew up and how you arrived here in the United States and so on and so forth. Can you please tell us a little bit about your background? Or a lot, whatever you want.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for asking. I don't really get to tell the story a lot.
Mm-hmm.
My country of origin is Cambodia. My parents are survivors, or genocide survivors from Cambodia. So around 1975 to 1979, it was called the Khmer Rouge,
Mm-hmm.
where there was genocide of about 3 million people. And during that time, my parents, they were around, I think my mom was age 9 and my dad was about 11. And they were taken from their families and they were forced to work in the rice fields. So while all of this was going on, there was, like I was saying, there was mass genocide, and they pretty much had to fend for themselves. My father's family, unfortunately, when this whole regime was over with, he tried to go home and all of his family were completely murdered.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I mean,
Where's the tissue?
Yeah, it's such a heavy story, and it's such an honor to be able to tell the story, because not a lot of, I'm a generation removed in terms of, so my background is that my parents had, as they grew older, they had an arranged marriage. And so when they were on their way to come to this country, they were in a refugee camp, and I was actually born in the refugee camp, so I have no recollection of anything that they went through. But when I was in college, I developed a really deep interest in what they, what all of this was about, like what were their individual stories prior to them meeting. So yeah, I mean, one day I hope to put their stories together into a book, and a lot of the qualities, a lot of the characteristics and traits that make me who I am today is really from them and from their survival here in the United States.
Yeah.
And
So going back to the refugee camp where their marriage was arranged, were they married before they went to the refugee camp?
yes. So my mom was about, I want to say 15 years old, and my dad, babies. And then my dad was, only 4 years older than her. And what had happened was, and this is, I'm telling the story through my mom and dad's voices, and so, and I hope I'm telling it correctly. But when my dad realized that he had no family left after the genocide was over, he ran into his grandmother in another province, and at that time he was just riding on his bike. Just by chance, riding on his bike, trying to survive, and he would tell me he would be eating snakes and rats that he would find. I mean, can you imagine? It was just horrific. And this, this 13-year-old boy. And so the country is pretty small, and so I think he, by chance, ran into his grandmother, and his grandmother knew my mom's side of the family. And, arranged marriages were quite common during that time. So his grandmother said, "Okay, well, it's time for you to get married." And I know a family, great reputation, and so my dad would go over to my mom's family when my mom wasn't there, and ask for her hand. And I think my mom told me that he went there about 11 times, And every time it was, no, 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 she's too young. She's going to France. She's going to become a doctor. And it was just such a, such an amazing story. And then 11th time, they were like, okay, well,
What broke?
Well, he said, here are my plans. This, I can't get their ages right because I don't know quite, but, 17, 18-year-old young man saying, my plan is to go to America and build a good life. And I want to have a good wife beside me when I do it. And they're like, okay. And
I want to raise an amazing daughter. Her name's going to be Sophie. Dr. Sophie.
It's just such a journey that we all, looking back, it's just like, how do we all end up here? And so from my dad's perspective, he said, he saw her, but she never saw him. And then my mom, from her perspective, she said, I didn't meet him, like, on their wedding day, there were 4 men sitting in front of her. She didn't know which one was her husband. She had no idea. And then later on, after it was all said and done, she goes, oh, yeah, thank goodness he was cute. So I always like to tell that story because it's just such a unique story, and I'm so honored and privileged to be a product of that. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. What an incredible story.
Yeah, and to answer your question, so my parents, after they got married, they were sponsored to come to the United States. And when they were sponsored, they had to stay in the refugee camp for, I think it was about 6 months to a year before everything would get processed and approved. And at that time, my mom didn't realize she was pregnant, so she had me in the refugee camp. She's like, that wouldn't have been my first choice for that to happen, but it happened that way. Prior to them coming to the United States, they needed to go to the Philippines. So they were all flown to the Philippines, and I don't know the term, what you would call that space, but they basically learned how to get acculturated and acclimated in order to adapt to the United States culture without getting all that culture shock. So they were taught how to eat pizza.
No kidding.
They were taught how American ceremonies work. Okay. So they staged an American ceremony, and there are pictures of my mom and dad. I mean, I was already born at the time, but there are pictures of them dressed up in the traditional American Western bride. And
that's how it works even till today?
The bride in the white dress.
Right. Yeah.
This is what they were taught.
Yeah.
That this is how Americans get married. So
that is.
And my mom was telling me, well, gosh, it's such a short wedding. It's only like 30 minutes, and our wedding was 3 days. So, yes. And so, just the huge differences there. I don't know. They learned English. They learned how to just adapt in an American way. And so when they came to the United States, they came to Austin, Texas. They, it wasn't as shocking for them. So when I came to the U.S., we first came to Austin, Texas, and we lived there for a couple years. Then we moved to Southern California, and so I grew up most of my for about 13 years in Southern California.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was it like growing up?
It was very sheltered. So if you can imagine, really what had happened was they took everything they knew and they brought it with them to a new country. So transplanting a new country with not really feeling like they're adapted or acclimated to the culture, they raised me as if they were raising a little girl in Cambodia.
That's really cute. That's what they knew, right?
That's all they knew, absolutely. So so how I was raised, great question. They raised me, again, very sheltered. I wasn't necessarily allowed to go outside because in Cambodia there was a lot of sex trafficking. So they were always afraid I was going to get kidnapped. And they were always afraid that, I would disappear. And it was just an interesting mentality.
Right.
And of course, not to look your elders in the eye.
Yeah.
Eye contact was disrespectful. If you spoke up, if I voiced my opinion, that would be considered disrespectful.
And we'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away.
I was 0.5 credits away from completing high school, and I didn't do it. My support team never stopped pushing for me to be better because they knew who I could become as a person. I've been given an opportunity, and I'm just thankful for it.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
I see the future is really bright for me. The high school diploma is just added to the confidence, and now I feel unstoppable.
Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org.
Hi, welcome back to Bridge to Wellness. And here we have Dr. Sophie, and I'm really excited about talking about your background. So we were talking about living at home and almost seeming like you were living in the refugee camp.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When they moved here, they were so young. They really just brought over everything they knew, just the Cambodian mindset. So they raised me as if I was a little girl in Cambodia. And we had talked about they were just afraid that I would get kidnapped because that would happen in Cambodia. There was a lot of sex trafficking that happened, and I couldn't look elders in the eyes because that was disrespectful, and young girls were taught not to speak up. So growing up, all of those things that I was taught from the Cambodian side definitely clashed with what I started learning from the Western side, living in the United States. I learned English by watching Sesame Street, and basically it was the best way to learn English, I thought, for, looking back now, because they would hold up the letter A and I would just mouth the letter A with Big Bird and Elastigirl the Grouch,
Right.
So it does work.
Yeah.
It definitely works.
Do you remember anything? What was your favorite part?
I do. I remember there was, and this was a very distinct memory. I do remember the TV set that that my parents had, and it was donated by the church. And it was like, I still remember, I think it was Grover holding up like the letter C, and I would mouth the letter C, and just, I had this little notebook that I would just try to copy everything in.
Yeah.
And it was, that was my life pretty much in my younger years. And when, as I grew older, I started realizing that, gosh, in America, kids have a lot of freedom. They have a lot of, they're able to really express themselves. And there was just so much internal conflict. So as I grew older, things like prom, it took me, gosh, a couple years just to convince my mom to let me go to prom. And of course it was just fears of the unknown, because they had never gone through those experiences themselves. And once I went through them, I have a younger brother who's about 5 years younger than me. Once I went through them, he had the free pass to really do whatever he wanted. He had 2 prom dates. He went to like 2 proms, one year after the other. But it was good for me to, looking back now, just to grow up in that environment where I look back and I have the privilege of being almost straddling both cultures. So I grew up speaking Cambodian, and now I don't speak it as much anymore because I definitely, if I stopped using it, I definitely lost it. But I think if I was immersed in the culture again, it would come back pretty easily. Other than that, as I grew into it, there was a lot of negotiating. There was a lot of inner negotiating that I had to do in terms of what is going to be best for me, and at the same time, not necessarily piss my parents off.
Yeah. Right
So
on.
there was a lot of that
Yeah.
happening, and it was, like any other teenager trying to grow up and find themselves.
Yes. So let's fast forward.
Mm-hmm.
You met Prince Charming.
Yes, he is my Prince Charming.
Okay. So was that relationship arranged?
It might as well have been arranged, actually, because we had met through a mutual friend, met through one of my best friends, and he actually met my parents prior to us dating. And I remember prior to Derek, I think I had introduced my mom and dad to a couple of other guys, and it was just a big fat no. At this point in time, Derek and I weren't even dating yet, but they met him and they saw something in him, and after a few weeks later, they're like, "Gosh, you should really consider dating him," which is just so unlike my parents,
Right.
and especially because he's blonde-haired, blue eyes, he's half Jewish, half German, and just completely different from what my mom and dad what they've been exposed to in terms of culture. But they were able to just see something within him, and I had seen it too, but I think there was something in the background just holding me back. Yeah. But in a sense, it was great to kind of get their, hey, go for it, to get their encouragement before we had even dated. So looking back, it was kind of a fun story.
I had the privilege of watching your wedding, probably one of the most beautiful, most amazing weddings I've ever seen. And I would love to share that if it's okay with you.
Oh, absolutely.
Moving forward, naturopathic medicine. Can you tell me about that?
Yes. How I got into naturopathic medicine is just a little interesting, because I went to the University of Texas in Austin, and I was pre-med, and I was planning on going to allopathic medical school. When I was a junior, something shifted. I had completed a summer pre-med program at Stanford, and while I was there, I was asking around, and I was just really, really needing to understand what alternative medicine was all about. And at that time, there was a doctor there, and she was the only doctor that had encouraged me to pursue this route. She said, "Sophie, there is a National Institutes of Health is opening a new branch called it was called NCAM, the National Institutes of Complementary and Alternative Medicine, and now the name's changed. It's Complementary and Integrative Medicine. However, during that time, it was still a time of exploration. I knew that I loved medicine and I loved helping people, but I didn't necessarily know what type of medicine I wanted to do or how I wanted to help people. She had told me, hey, look, explore this path, take your time in figuring out what you want to do. Don't go into anything that may not be completely aligned with your values and your passion." And that was the best advice I ever got in terms of career advice. So after I completed that, I was scheduled to go to Japan for 4 months. And while I was in Japan, it was just the most amazing experience. I think I was about 19 or 20 years old, and I went there with 18 other students, and we just explored. We were given a free pass to do a field research project. So my field research project was on longevity and alternative medicine, and what methods a society had or used prior to modern medicine coming into play. So that was my research project. And while I was there, I just fell in love with these rural parts of the area. I was in Kyoto, I was in Fukuoka, and I went hot spring hopping, and I was on this mountain with a shaman, and it just really told me that I needed something that was natural. I need to do something that was natural, but still feeding my yearning to understand the scientific basis behind that. So after I came back from Japan, there was a lot more soul searching that I was doing, and I found naturopathic medicine. I ended up applying to several schools, but the one school that really, really caught my attention was a school called Bastyr University up in Seattle. And when you're driving through, you're driving through this. It's in a state park, so it's driving through these huge, beautiful trees, and it's green and it's lush and it's just so inviting. And I thought, oh, if I'm going to study medicine, I need to study it in this environment. And that's what happened. I found that school, I did my interview, and I made my decision, and here I am.
What better way to study in a place that you love so much, that you're able to relax and feel serene at the same time?
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially something as intense as this.
And it was a 5-year postdoctorate program, or a 5-year doctorate program, and then I did a 2-year postdoctorate residency out in Santa Rosa, and it was a medically supervised water fasting facility. It just blew me away. I walked into this with no knowledge of fasting or anything, but it's an inpatient facility where patients would come from all over the world, and with diabetes, high blood pressure, with different cancers, with just rare diseases that I would only know about from textbooks. And they were all pulled to this fasting center because they needed a different way.
Yeah.
They needed a different way. The medications weren't working. They just needed more answers.
Yes.
And fasting was a new paradigm for them, a new method, a new modality that they said, well, if I just need to try this. And a lot of the patients would come in with 20 different medications, and then they would leave. I mean, they would stay for a while, and there was a lot of work that had to be done. We would use a lot of nutrition. There was a chef on site, and so my role there was to be an attending doctor, and patients would come, and I would pretty much create their whole plan from beginning to end, and then I would round on them twice a day.
Do you use that method here?
At Trilogy?
Yes.
At Trilogy, monitoring fasting for my outpatients is it's a little bit more challenging than monitoring it in an inpatient facility, because when I was there, I would be able to I was living on site at the time too, and I would just be able to go to their room and check up on them day or night. I was on call.
Oh, how ideal.
Yeah, and then I was able to just write exactly, what the chef needed to make for them, and they would bring it to their door, and just had a lot of, I was able to have a lot of control and oversight over their plan, and knowing what the results would be. In an outpatient setting, in a private practice setting, it's doable. It's a little bit more challenging. I never recommend anybody fasting on their own for too long, just because there are things that could come up. When at the other facility, we would check their blood work once a week and their urine. But there are modifications that can be done. Really, what it comes down to is nutrition. And one of my favorite stories is I had one patient who she's in her 60s, and her goal is to live to 100. Just the happiest woman. And she went through a lot of stress at that time, and basically what had happened was she was given medications and her blood pressure wouldn't come down. It was like 200 over 120 at one point, and she thought she was going to have a heart attack, a stroke, and they ran EKGs and they did all of these things. And I said, well, let's try something different and let's just do an experiment and see what happens. So I told her to just try a plant-based only diet, no salt, no oil, no sugar, for 2 weeks. And I said, let's chart your blood pressure twice a day and see what happens. And she was off of blood pressure meds within 2 weeks.
What a miracle. What a miracle. Do you have a lot of stories like this?
I do,
Yeah.
especially from the center that I was working at. And because I know what the results are, I have a lot of faith in the body, in the body's natural ability to heal itself.
Absolutely. And we'll be right back after these messages.
Hi, I'm Peter, and there's nothing I love more than sharing vegetables with my friends. Come on in! Help yourself to anything. That's why we give our food the utmost respect it deserves. Did you know there are simple steps we can all take to help save food? You can cook it, store it, even share it. Just don't waste it. Because when it comes to food, better ache than never. To learn more, visit savethefood.com.
40% of food in America is never eaten.
Welcome back to Bridge to Wellness. My name is Bridget Guila, your host, and with me today is Dr. Sophie. Dr. Sophie, we're talking about your experiences in this clinic. Would you call it a clinic?
Center where I did my postdoctorate residency.
Okay, so now I'd like to talk about the body. And first of all, can people get off blood pressure medication with naturopathic medicine?
Most people can, and unless there is some underlying heart condition there, everything needs to be assessed first. So I won't say that everybody can just get off of them on their own, and needs to be properly managed by a physician, of course. But I will say that if the high blood pressure is due to lifestyle and poor lifestyle choices, so poor diet or not enough exercise, then yes, without a doubt, it can be reversed.
What are the few tips that you have that people can do on their own today?
So the first tip is to start adding more vegetables. And I say that with a lot of excitement and passion and encouragement because it's a really, really easy thing to say. It's a very challenging thing to do. And all of the wellness habits are very simple. And it's just doing it on a daily basis. And even drinking more water, getting half your body weight in ounces of water will work wonders on energy levels and even on blood pressure and just skin. And it's just the simple things.
Yeah.
So more fruits and vegetables, more water, and more sleep. And again, it's there's really nothing new. And these are the things that I learned in Japan. These are things that people have been practicing. Well, when it's practiced consistently on a daily basis, these are the things that are really going to compound in a positive way. And unfortunately, in our modern day society, it's really easy to brush those things off and say, we'll do that later when I have time. But really, thinking of it as you're depositing money into a health account, and that's going to compound, and you'll be reaping the benefits later. Because right now is all we have.
Yes. Yeah. The three things I think about is fresh air, plant-based, and plenty of water.
Yes.
Lots of water.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely lots of exercise. But first of all, keep the body clean.
Absolutely.
The walls need to be clean. And if the walls are not clean, can you get proper absorption?
The walls of the gut?
Yes.
So, yes, that's a very good point that you bring up. It's really, really important there are many receptors along the lining of the GI tract. So what we found in patients with diabetes, with type 2 diabetes, so type 1 diabetes patients should never fast. It's not recommended. It's
Good
highly
point.
dangerous.
Yeah.
Type 2 diabetes, this is the adult onset diabetes. It's been shown that the receptors, the insulin receptors around the body are, for lack of a better term, they're clogged. So when a person fasts, those receptors will clear out, and then insulin will be able to sit back in there, and the nutrients will go back into the cells. Mm-hmm. So it's all related. And as far as the GI tract goes, if we're not nourishing our bodies properly, lots of antibiotics, lots of alcohol, lots of junk food, what happens is that there's a condition called intestinal permeability, and the lining of the gut cells, the lining of the GI tract are made up of trillions of little cells, and all of these cells should be touching. They should be kissing one another. Mm-hmm. They should be nice and tight, because when you are eating food, it has to break down. So for example, it breaks down into building blocks. When you're eating carbohydrates, it breaks down into the main building block, glucose. Mm. When you're eating proteins, it breaks down to amino acids. And when you're eating fats, it breaks down into lipids. So those are the main building blocks that your body recognizes. However, like I said, if there's a lot of alcohol, if there's a lot of antibiotics, if there's a lot of things that are going to damage we'll call it the glue that keeps the cells together, then there's going to be things that are going to be flowing through those barriers that should be tight. Mm-hmm. It'll be flowing through and into the bloodstream. And yes, this will affect absorption. Mm-hmm. It'll also set off triggers in the immune system, because now all of a sudden, if things are getting through this, this impermeable space, and it's not completely impermeable, it's semi-permeable. So the right things that should be getting through are getting through for you to absorb all the nutrients. However, if the glue that holds the cells together are being damaged, then things that aren't supposed to be going through to the bloodstream will set off the immune system.
So what damages the cells? Poor nutrition?
Typically, poor nutrition, alcohol, lots of sugar, inflammatory.
Alcohol.
Antibiotics will kill all of the gut flora. Mm-hmm. And it's not going to happen overnight. It's when the GI tract is exposed to years and years and years of this. And then all of a sudden there's like the body can only compensate so much, because again, like we were talking about, the body is just a miraculous, beautiful thing. But it compensates to a point where it can't. And when it can't, that's when you see disease arise. And so at that point in time, if all of these cells, they're called the tight junctions that holds the cells together, if they're being broken apart or they're being damaged, things that aren't supposed to be going into the bloodstream are going into the bloodstream, then what happens is that the body, again, your body has this natural sensor, this natural radar that will say, hey, this shouldn't be in your body, we need to get it out, which activates your immune system. And when that happens, you get the pain, you get the redness, the swelling. So you get inflammation.
Inflammation.
Yes.
Yes. So that's my next question. I think a lot of stuff comes from inflammation. But can you please explain that?
Acute inflammation, which is short term. So inflammation that happens if we were to have a cut on our skin and it starts to get red and swollen, that's called acute inflammation, because your body, this is what your body is meant to do. It needs to react, it needs to respond very quickly, right away. So short-term inflammation is actually the first step to healing. So inflammation short-term in the right way is actually completely normal, and it's completely good for the body. It's the first step towards healing. However, inflammation that keeps happening over and over and over on a chronic basis, that's more dangerous. And that's where you see the diabetes, the high blood pressure. Those are all conditions of inflammation or having inflammation as a root cause. And with that, we see, okay, there's at the core of that, there's poor lifestyle habits that we were talking about earlier. And the coolest thing that I see is when we say, hey, let's just experiment. Let's remove all of these obstacles that are happening in your body to prevent your body from healing properly. So inflammation, the chronic inflammation, is preventing the body from healing properly. And we see that go on and on and on. Then again, that's where disease arises. So I just want to make that clarification because it can get a little confusing.
Yeah, it does get confusing. The body is very complicated. The things that we need to do to keep it healthy are very simple.
Absolutely.
Very, very simple.
Yes,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Does everything start from the gut?
I get questions like that all the time. There's no one place where it starts. Disease can have very many different access points, but having a healthy gut is one of the key players in having a healthy body. So when I say it depends, I hate for it to sound like a cop-out answer, but it actually depends on the whole picture. And another tenet of naturopathic medicine is to look at the whole person before we say one thing is causing another thing.
And another thing that I like to look at seems like life is also about good digestion.
Yes, absolutely. And good digestion will depend on a variety of factors. Your GI tract starts from your mouth, like you mentioned, and it ends where we all know it ends, with good, healthy bowel movements. In a nutshell, that's what good, healthy digestion is. So when we talk about, at that point in time, what do we need to do to maintain that? We just need to maintain the flow. So adequate fiber through the fruits and vegetables. And different things can prevent the body from being regular. So then we need to look at all of that. If a person is getting enough fiber, then what is it that's, what are some other factors that we need to address? So again, looking at the whole picture. Otherwise, again, like you said, it's so simple, and having enough water, that all affects. And it's amazing how those things that we listed off earlier can affect so many systems in the body.
It's just also amazing and fascinating, and everything that you talk about is just, I'm on the edge with it because it's just such a great topic, the human body itself. What about hydration? Drinking plenty of water.
Yes.
What are the benefits of that?
That is one of the hardest things for a lot of the patients that I see, because they may not have, I always tell everybody, the first week when you're trying to get that much water, you're trying to rehydrate your cells, your body needs to get used to it. So sipping little by little over the course of a day will help prevent, the rushing to the bathroom every 5 minutes. And what happens when those cells are hydrated is that it affects energy levels. The body is 70+% water, and it affects our cognitive function. Your brain needs to be hydrated. Your muscles need to be hydrated. People tend to perform better with exercise when they're hydrated. They're not as tired. People even sleep better when they're hydrated.
Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
And we'll be right back after these messages. And welcome back to Bridge to Wellness. My name is Bridget Guila, your host. And with me today is Dr. Sophie. Dr. Sophie, now I would like to talk about the soothing part of wellness. Let's talk about how people can incorporate that into their whole wellness. There's what we eat, and there's the exercise and getting plenty of fresh air and hydration. And what about soothing the mind?
That's perfect. I'm so glad you brought that up because that is the piece with mind-body. The mind and body cannot be separated. So I'm so glad you touched on that because I started meditating when I was 14 years old, and that's what really drew me to this path because I know that there's such a strong connection. If we're going to look at the whole person, we have to look at the mind as well and the emotions. And meditation, usually how I explain to my patients is that meditation will bring you to this moment. And realizing that we don't have any other moments that's going to be quite as unique as this. Every moment it's its own precious moment. There will be another moment where these words will come out of my mouth at this time and place. Well, I'm sitting across from you, and we're wearing these clothes, and it's just thinking about it in that way is so humbling, and it's such a beautiful thing. It's such a precious gift, right? With all of my patients, I like to just bring them to this moment.
With my experience alone being next to you, nothing else matters in this world. Your good, humble nature just radiates, it oozes from you, so people naturally relax. There's nothing more to think about. It's a safe feeling.
Thank you. That's such a compliment. I'm so honored to hear these words from you. I feel the same about you. I always come to you when I when I need some relaxing words of wisdom. And yes, and that just coming back to this moment because there's nothing else that matters. Simply because everything else, the future, the past, really it resides here. It's not residing right here now. And that does have a huge impact on a person's well-being because, for example, if we are worried about what we're going to do a week from now or...
The W word.
Yeah. There are hormones that will be secreted that will start to move around in our body. Adrenaline, cortisol, the stress hormone, huge. And if we were to draw a person's blood or look at a panel, I mean, those things will change because the mind is actively affecting the body. And if that is the case, that, we always think about, the body can affect the mind because when we're not feeling well, if we're sick, then it may create anxiety or it may create some low moods. But the opposite also happens, that we putting ourselves into a positive mind frame, just resetting, reframing what's going on, and again, coming back to this very moment, will actually reduce the stress hormones. Our breathing will naturally get deeper. It will slow down. Our heart rates will slow down. All of those physiological things will be impacted by what we think. And it's such an important part to wellness, and I'm so happy that you brought that up. And just to be able to, when I say meditation, meditation can mean a lot of different things. It can be such a loaded word for some people, depending on their backgrounds, or it can be such an elusive term. So it's also finding what that means to a person. Meditation can mean a very different things, and I always like to have my patients explore what that means to them. So it's not about me telling them what anything is, it's about them finding meaning within that space, within that practice themselves. Mm-hmm. And also, just relating that back to when we talked about disease. Disease can have messages for us. It can tell us something. It can tell us, hey, we need to slow down. And I think if we're able to hone in on on saying disease isn't always bad, but what can we learn from it while we're trying to heal that disease? And through that process, we use meditation to help a person come to that realization of what exactly that means to them. Because disease can, especially, for example, autoimmune diseases, and that's a term that's thrown around a lot. And an autoimmune disease is just the immune system pretty much not cooperating with itself. Its inflammation has gone on for too long, and there's some dysregulation happening. So when that happens over time, there needs to be a recalibration, right? The body again, we know that it knows how to heal itself, but now it's kind of all wonky. So let's slow down, let's recalibrate, and again, within that process, let's figure out, what is working in our lives and what isn't. Let's take some inventory. And eventually, through meditation, through the healthy, simple habits that we spoke about, the person will usually find some clarity, and it's beautiful to watch.
It's beautiful. And that's everything that you have to offer, and that's naturopathic medicine, correct?
Yes.
Yes, it's also wonderful, and I would like to talk about your website.
It doesn't. When you click on my website, drsophielorn.com, it actually, there's a picture of a person who is standing up on this mountain, and they're looking out at this vast, beautiful nature, and they're standing up on top, pretty much on top of the world. And that's the feeling that I want people to have when it comes to their health and well-being, that there's a sense of freedom. And that's my favorite word in the world, a sense of freedom. Mm-hmm. There's an emotional freedom, there's a physical freedom, that they can move their limbs freely and just live their life with joy, ease, and love. And so I like that to be the first thing that people see. And
I felt it the moment you just described it. I felt free. I just had this visual, and I was flying.
Yeah, and then you scroll down, and it'll pretty much summarize my philosophy that health is simple, and daily things add up. And I'm adding more content to it, but there's a little bit about my background, and
it's just so amazing, and I'm very honored to have worked with you for these years now.
Oh, so am I. It's been such a blessing for me.
The question, the topic that I love the most, and I would talk about this to my students and my clients and friends and guests, is joy and laughter, and how important that is in healing, is to be happy. I remember a time when I saw Master Zhao Qigong, and his wife, he would laugh and he would say, be happy, be happy. And I got it. I was laughing almost in tears because I get it. Happiness and joy and laughter and just dropping silly jokes will just be silly. Being silly will help reduce depression and reduce any of that overwhelming sense of yuckiness inside of our bodies. And I feel like we can enjoy healing much easier when we choose that type of lifestyle, when we're laughing. Yeah. What is your take on that?
Oh my gosh, I completely agree.
Yeah.
I don't know at what point in time we make the transition from feeling like we're able to play and be kids, and then all of a sudden, abruptly, we're adults and we have these responsibilities, and then maybe it compounds over time. But what is the message that we're getting in our society, that we have to stop being kids, right?
Right.
And this is something that I work on myself, and this is what I tell my patients: just let's take care of ourselves as if we were our own kids. Let's continue to play, take care of our bodies as if we were taking care of our own child's body, and play as if we were that child, because oftentimes that's where joy comes from. There's almost a yearning of wanting to get back to that childlike innocence.
What is that chemical? Is it dopamine?
It's a combination. Endorphins, there's dopamine, there's serotonin. That's all moving around, orchestrated.
That's the happy chemical. Would you call it chemicals in your body?
Yes.
Those are the happy chemicals. For example, when we eat something really delicious, what is the chemical that comes up? Is it
Usually it's dopamine and serotonin. They're reward chemicals, basically. So they can work in your favor and they can work not in your favor.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's a
Thank
pleasure
you.
being here.
Always a pleasure. And your website?
It's drsophielorn.com.
Okay, awesome. I would love to have you back on my show. There's so much wealth of information that I would like to talk about.
Oh, I would love. It's such a pleasure and honor.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.